much to all the panel members for joining us today. I'm going to kickstart the discussions with the first question about the challenges that you see and face in the current, for the next generation, in terms of the technology trends. How do you look at it and how do you guys respond to these changing trends? So I'd like to start discussion with Henry.
Okay, hi Jun, good morning, and hi everybody. Yeah, very nice to be in this panel. It looks to be very exciting ones as well. I think for technology, really, in my perspective, is that technology is very much an oversold thing, in the sense that, you know, many technologies are being branded as technology, but is this something that is really life improving? It's very hard to know, because a lot of technologies or even services that we see coming from startups or even generally around the world, they are very much focused on technology that brings convenience, but not very much a technology that brings improvement in everybody's life. One example that was quoted by some technologists as well, in the sense that when microwave is created, it's meant to be more convenient. It makes you able to warm up your food quicker and easier, but it doesn't actually make your food taste better. In fact, it might even make your food taste worse, right? So I think technological challenges are there in the sense that we should have an objective in how we deploy technology, rather than just developing technology for the sake of saying that's the best technology there is in the market. Yeah. I think the challenges now is really to introduce technologies that will improve human life, rather than just making life to be just convenient, as I put it that way.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the focus needs to be more on improving the life and not just for the sake of doing it. Yeah. I wanted to call Donovan. Do you have any insights or something that you'd like to share in this perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jun. Firstly, I want to say that amongst my fellow panelists, I'm the least qualified, right? I mean, just amongst me is like fellow co-founders. Although I've been in the startup scene for quite a while, and although LARK belongs to ByteDance, we are a very startup-ish company as well. When I joined, we were less than 10. In the span of about a year plus now, we have grown to over 50. So it's a good, I think we've seen certain traction in the market, which is a good sign. But to answer that question, Jun, I think I would second to what Dato Henry mentioned, and I'll share based on the experience about LARK, right? So speaking about technology, we are a tech company, right? And I think it's about, or rather the challenge / the trend is, I think it's also seconding what Mr. Ash mentioned earlier about not just technology for technology's sake, but technology to solve real business problems, right? So I think as Jun shared earlier, LARK is an all-in-one collaboration platform where you have like chat, emails, OKRs. Simply your daily business processes are all in one app. And with this, I answer the part to the challenge and being really very honest here. I think where we are in the business right now, we are still trying to craft our product market fit. Because a tool like LARK applies to all industries, right? It's a very agnostic tool. But where's our sweet spot, right? So to answer that part to our challenge, one of the things we do is the model of LARK is a freemium model. So the way we price our solution is it's a free plan for companies below the size of 50. So if you are a startup here below the size of 50, the good news is if you want to try out LARK, it's free. Now, on the back end, what is in it for LARK is for us to gather data, which is, I think, also what Mr. Ash mentioned earlier about seeing, okay, what are some of the use cases from different customers with different roles, what we call buyer personas, in different industries. So when we gather such data, then it gives us an insight, okay, aside from maybe solving retail problems, right, perhaps software and services is a very niche industry that we solve problems ABC. So from a demand generation standpoint and where we then channel our resources into, these are then our top industries. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers the question, but I'm coming from a technology background as well.
Thanks, Don. So I wanted to progress the discussion a bit more further on what else are you seeing in the next generation and what are the challenges and how are you responding to it? So Aizat, any views on the response side?
I think In regards to trend, everyone should probably know that AI is probably the next big thing. So what we did at DROPEE is that we hired an intern. No, just joking. In regards to AI, I think it's more of really trying to see if there's a real usage, at least particularly to your own business. What we're starting to see is that a lot of our clients as well starting to really look into the how to automate some of their processes using AI. At least on our end, we try to start to adapt a bit of the data that from all the transactions that we have on our platform, and try to see whether can we actually use or at least shorten the sales cycle to help our clients. But to be honest, if you were to ask me honestly, the challenges is that it's not as easy as how most people think it is. I think if you go to ChatGPT, it's you as a consumer, if you were to type it, then most of the time the way that they answered it is very structured and seems like it's accurate. But more often than not, it's still not 100% true. You won't be able to really find the source of all those discussions. So a lot of the startups that I'm starting to talk to, they have also started to try to adopt all this AI into their business, but it's not necessarily accurate. So I think one of the challenges is for them to really understand whether if they were to adopt and implement that kind of technology or this trend, is it just for the sake of to solve their business or just for the sake of just part of being a trend? So I think that is something very critical especially for a lot of founders. Got to ask yourself whether it's something that makes sense or no. Yes, it is critical. It is the next big thing, but to see whether it's applicable for your business and your client ecosystem is going to be part of something you really need to think deep.
Okay, so thanks, Aizat. So we have to be very mindful of what we're doing and why we're doing it for. Last but not least, Jason, any perspective from the blockchain technology side?
I think definitely, to start with the trends, definitely AI, ChatGPT, right? And also I believe in blockchain technologies, right? Because it's decentralized, it's more secure, it's automated, right? So, but in terms of challenges, I think I realized that, there's a huge digital knowledge gap right now. And then I would say, according to research, actually 50% of the people are not equipped with digital knowledge to be fit to work in this digital economy by 2030, right? But what does this mean? Actually, what does this mean for Malaysia, right? I believe this is an opportunity, right? Because if we look at the world's youth population, 80% of them are actually from Africa and Asia, with Malaysia being in the center. So it's actually a huge opportunity for Malaysians, and I believe that, to actually redefine and reshape the industry moving forward, I think as founders, like what Dato Henry and also Donovan mentioned, I think building real businesses that solve real world problems, simple, and of course, changing the business must actually drive humanity forward, must actually help people live better, right? Yeah, so that's my take on it.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So I think we could see a similar theme. All of them were saying, make sure you're solving it for real life improvements and real businesses for the betterment of society as well. So going on to the next question then, in terms of keeping up with the times and making sure that your businesses are resilient, to make sure that, how do you defend yourself? Would you defend yourselves, or would you just try to be ahead of the curve and make sure that you get there before everyone else? Aizat, do you want to start off the discussion?
Yeah, sure. So I've been running DROPEE for close to 7 years now. So one of the key mandate that our company never changed since day one is always look into what your customer wants. I think that's quite simple. You don't need to disrupt yourself. You don't need to really disrupt the industry or anything. But it's more towards like how you can actually bring value to your clients. And the time changes, so your clients' demand will change as well. I think one of the areas where I'm starting to see is that a lot of founders, even though once they already get to a certain stage, they tend to forget why they actually built a company. They stop talking to their customers. They stop really trying to understand. All they look into is just their numbers, their sheets, and just trying to see how they can raise better, try to get into profitability. Those things are important, don't get me wrong, but I think it's very critical as a founder, especially on the management team, to really speak to your customers and try to understand what they are actually looking for. I think one of the panelists just now mentioned about product market fit. It's very critical, regardless of how big your company is, what stage you're in. It's always something that you need to constantly look and reiterate again. Because the moment your customers actually hook, to your product, it's great. But time changes as well, and eventually they might go into something else. You need to understand why. And if you don't know exactly why they actually moved to a different platform, then you're not getting your business, you're not going to be sustainable. It's actually simple as that. Client is number one.
Okay, so it's less of trying to disrupt the market, but making sure that you're always relevant and being customer-centric
That's right.
about it. Okay, thanks, Aizat. Henry, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think what Aizat says is true. I mean, not because we are supporting each other in the panel, but rather that that's true fact in the sense that, MACROKIOSK perspective, I've started a company 23 years ago, so it's a very long time. But nevertheless, is that, when we started the company, we initially have some kind of success starting, then we start to look at things like diversification and things like that. But unfortunately, most of the time when you start to diversify, it didn't work well. So it didn't really work well for us. But then, because of that, we then refocus our business to then say, let's focus on something that we can really do really well. Because the initial gist of diversification is really coming to the point where we try to then say, follow the trend. Try to get the latest things, follow the latest trends and stuff like that. But then it just doesn't turn out to be because you're like probably master of all, jack of all, but master of none, right? I think that's where we refocus our company and focus our business on a certain angle of that we think we can do best. So in MACROKIOSK perspective now, what we do is that, while obviously we do a lot of research in terms of using new technology, even like ChatGPT, for example, but regardless of what technology that we're using, the key important thing here is that we must set objective of our businesses. So for MACROKIOSK products and services, as we develop, we only based on 3 principles. The first principle is really to help customers to acquire customers. We help customers to grow their customers, and also help our customers to retain their customers. So no matter what technology that we use, to be honest, we even use very, very ubiquitous technology, but it just doesn't matter. At point in time, we're able to meet customers' requirements, customer needs, and I think that helped us to really, really focus our product development and our company's direction, rather than following technology, because technology used to change 18 months, but now I think technology changes probably 18 days. So I think it just doesn't make sense to keep on catching up with that. Yeah.
Okay, so don't have to go into a panic mode and try to catch up with technology all the time. Instead, focus on who your customers are. And diversification may or may not work, depending on how it applies. But if you focus on your customers, then you will always be ahead of the game. So then we go to the next question about how to be ahead of the game, particularly for the future generation per se, in terms of the entrepreneurs that they would need to face all of these different challenges. What do you think is going to be different, and how do you think they need to prepare themselves? Is there any types of skill sets do you think they need to have that will be different from what we've seen prior to this? Don, do you want to kick off this one?
Trying to capture the question.
Yeah, sorry.
So, when I think about future generation, I think what I'll think of is Generation Alpha, right? So I think where we are right now is we have transited from a millennial generation to a Gen Z, and then we are transiting into like the future generation, which is it's going to impacting the way that we live, because these will be the future leaders of the businesses, even future consumers, right? So yeah, Generation Alpha. If I remember correctly, they were born after the year 2010. Interestingly, 2010 was the year that the iPad was also released, right? So when I think about future generations, I think I'll think of it from 2 aspects. Number one is they are pure digital natives. If COVID has changed our lives and the way that we run our businesses, I think what more even the Generation Alpha, because the whole entire education system was also changed. When I was in high school, I think none of us would have thought that we will be doing classrooms remotely. Then the big C came, COVID came, and there came introduced like remote learning, right? So I think the entire lifestyle, the introduction of like TikTok, social media, whatnot, and even learning is also now all remote, right? So I think how the future generations will be even inclusive of like them being entrepreneurs, I think it will be a very digital way of life. So I think I'll think of it as one aspect. The other one is, I think, from this aspect as well, is the advocacy of remote work. So with now remote work becoming the norm, I think then it will not just become a norm, but it will really be an innate way of life. So I think putting these two, part of the question is what are some skill sets that we can look into this? I think it's about thinking about the digital workplace strategy, which is if the future generations will be the Gen Alpha and employees also will be the Gen Alpha, what will be the workplace strategy to attract talent, to retain talent, and what will be the strategy to engage them? Yeah, I think I'll come from this angle.
Okay. So that's quite interesting, Don, because what you're saying is that you have to think about how you also want to retain your future staff and your future team members as well when you are the entrepreneur per se. So for bringing the conversation to Henry, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think in that sense that there's not much different between, I mean, if you talk about startup founders or startup CEOs or company CEOs perspective or entrepreneurs perspective, I think at the end of the day, there's not much difference between olden days and now. The only difference now is that things change much quicker. You can see effects quicker than it used to be. But I think for me, the key important part is that it's continue to adopt, adapt, and continue to learn. I mean, in my perspective itself, for example, MACROKIOSK, we have been around for 23 years. I mean, God bless as well. Like last year, we did our record revenue year for the past 23 years. But it just shows that a company needs to continuously innovate and adapt and changes. So it's the product that we sold 23 years ago. It's not something that we're selling now. But generally, it's a continuous innovation that we see that able to achieve through continued adoption, adaptation, and learning. I think that's the same as entrepreneur. I think we need to continue to learn. I think a lot of business people, when they reach a certain point, when they feel like they are very, really successful, right? And actually, when you feel like you're already at the top of the world, the only thing you can do next is coming down from the top of the world, right? So when you feel like you are there and you don't want to learn, you don't want to believe that you can know more things, then at the end of the day, you'll be just like the dinosaur, I think. That's really where I would say.
Okay, so make sure we're not dinosaurs. Make sure we continue to always want to learn. But is there any industry or something that is different, Henry, that you feel the next generation would still need to deal with? Anything from ESG or something? Because now we're being more focused on those stuff.
I think, for example, I think you look at the world now. I think people are being more aware of sort of civic-minded now. You know, in terms of environment, in terms of governance, in terms of sustainability. That's where the big thing of ESG comes about. I think people are more open to these ideas and they understand what they want. And I think companies and products and services that we offer should also be in that perspective. It's no more. You know, a lot of times say for example, like the whole generation of people when electric cars are launched, like by Tesla, and people think that Tesla is a good thing, but why people buy Tesla is because they want to save the environment, for example. Of course, Tesla cars are also quite good, but the key point is that why they're opening to then electric cars, because they're opening up the idea of saving the environment. I think this is an angle where companies can go towards, where hitting on people's civic-mindedness is very important in the next term of attracting customers or even building great new products. Yeah.
Okay, so adaptability and civic-mindedness are the different things that they really have to carry through for the next generation. Jason, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, maybe I think I'll add on one point. I think that, you know, like what Donovan and Dato Henry mentioned, like we are living in a digital world, and you know, as the future generation comes, it's going to be even more digitalized, right? So I will assume that, you know, the new generations, they're going to have like 3 devices, right? So their world is all surrounding by like technological gadgets and things. But I think what is important is also, I believe that when it comes to business relationship, even with your clients, with partners, I think real-world communication is very important, right? So, and as we are more, you know, living in this technology era, we actually kind of forget about this important skills, which is, you know, communication skills, real-world communication skills, right? So I think this is something that, you know, for the future generation, they should have this in their mind, right? Yeah, that's my take.
What do you mean by real-world communication?
I think it's like more of like, you know, even like table talk skills, like real life meetings, because everything is done virtually right now. So I think this is the part where, you know, I think it's a skill when it comes to communication, right? How do you communicate with different cultures, corporate communication, right? So I think that this is something that is essential for founders to have an ability. Yeah.
I'm just going to throw it to the other panelists. Anyone else wants to jump in on this perspective that Jason is talking about real-world communication? No? Aizat says no. Okay. No?
I think what Jason is talking about is interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Henry? No?
Yeah?
We just all agree.
Yeah, we all agree.
Okay, thank you so much. So then we'll move on to the next question about ecosystem support. Since we are at a MYStartup Cradle event, why not take this opportunity to also share your views on what do you think is something that the next generation really needs more of, or something that will really help improve the dynamic features of the startups in Malaysia. Henry, do you want to go?
Yeah, this is a very tricky question.
Yes.
And sometimes it's also, while we always, for me, is that while we always want to globalize, right? We want to make sure that we are in all markets anywhere. For example, like people like DROPEE, they are in a few countries, for example, right? So we always want to be globalized in our perspective. But behind in my mind, I mean, this is a Malaysian event. I think in the sense that I feel like I'm quite nationalistic in this perspective, in the sense that in terms of ecosystem, I believe that there are a lot of, not just ecosystem like what Cradle is doing, where we provide funding and nurture the entrepreneurs, but also come to a point where the bigger companies, bigger Malaysian companies should actually provide assistance to the startup ecosystem as well. Assistance, like for example, I don't say preference in procurement, but rather that they should open up an opportunity for local companies to pitch first in terms of what technology that we have or what technology that they require. Not just in the perspective of Malaysian companies in Malaysia supporting Malaysian startups, but I think also we should also look at Malaysian companies that went abroad. They should also try to support Malaysian companies that are trying to go into that market as well. I think this logic is not something new. I mean, while obviously countries like Malaysia, we want to be very open, but generally there are countries like, for example, Japanese companies, for example, or Japanese culture for a very long time. When they go overseas, for example, they would like to stay in the Japanese hotel. They drive Japanese cars. And there's multiple things. I want to use the Japanese data center, for example. That's why a lot of NTT data centers are hosting Japanese companies, right? The same goes to now, China, the next growing area. Why people like, when our company invested in China about almost 20 years ago, when we started in Beijing, it's very, very difficult for us because, say like China Telecom, when they want to build a tower, in Malaysia, probably we choose Ericsson. Maybe we say now choose Huawei. But at the time, in China Telecom at the time, even they know that the technology in China is not so good, but they will choose Huawei first. They choose ZTE first. And I think this is an environment where then when Huawei and ZTE become so strong by itself in China, they can actually go out and compete very, very strongly. So I think certain sense of nationalistic in certain countries is important. I mean, obviously, when we go to another country, nationalistic is not there anymore. But then when we go to other countries, then obviously we need to compete. We really will compete with the latest technology. But at least in our own country, not to say we must procure Malaysia only, but we should give Malaysia preference. I think this will help Malaysian companies to grow. But unfortunately, to be honest, especially like us, yeah, my company is supported by a lot of Malaysian customers, no doubt. But I believe there are a lot of times where they like to choose overseas product first, thinking that it's I don't know, maybe more secure because if Malaysian products have something wrong, then maybe they'll lose their job if they choose a Malaysian product. So if I choose a very branded product, something wrong, is that product's problem? I think this is where I foresee that the ecosystem goes beyond just having funding and nurturing of startups, because it's the market opportunity that is also needed for startups to really grow strongly. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective, because it's not only speaking to the corporates to be able to say, hey, look, maybe we should look at the Malaysian companies first and foremost, but also as an individual per se, what choices are you making to also help your startup ecosystem are you making those choices to also help each other?
Just
and
add on a
partner
little bit as well. I mean, it's not just about big companies supporting small companies. Even
Yeah.
startups should support startups, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, is that I also feel that sometimes startup entrepreneurs, we are very competitive, yes, but then it doesn't need to compete until a point that we don't talk to each other, right? I mean, startups, if they have another technology from Malaysia that's good, we should also work together. I think that's something that will really helpful for the ecosystem. Yeah.
and collaborate together at events such as this.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you, Henry. Aizat, do you want to chip in?
Yeah. Hello? Yeah, so I think Henry pretty much covered most of it, but let me try to break it down into two things that I think can actually help the ecosystem. One is on the individual side, us as an individual, and second is maybe government policy. So first one is on the individual things. I think one thing, like I just wanted to echo what Henry mentioned earlier, is the openness to help one another. I still don't really see it here in Malaysia. People tend to just really keep a lot of their thoughts, a lot of their expert within themselves, among their friends. And I think that's a bit shame because more often than not, whenever as entrepreneurs, we go through a lot of ups and downs. And if we can actually share a bit of our knowledge and experience to some of the new entrepreneurs, I think that would be very helpful for them because they can shorten up a lot of their learning process. Because ultimately, you want to do a business, you want to be an entrepreneur, it's all about learning. Every single day is keep on changing, learn, relearn, tweak it all the time. And another thing that, in regards to individual, that I see Malaysia is still lacking of, it's the previous gens supporting new gens. What I mean by that is like, if you look at like Japan, Singapore, the States, most of the time, those entrepreneurs who have already sold their companies or go IPO, they tend to go back to where they came from on their route, and they mentor, they guide a lot of these entrepreneurs themselves. We at DROPEE were quite fortunate. We were part of the YC, and the Airbnb founder literally came down and guided us through. I mean, come on, he's running a $1 billion plus company, and he still have the time to help us, small startups. And then when I started to really understand why, is because that there is almost like a culture, a norm for them to always give back. And even if, let's say, amongst the peers, they will still try to help wherever that they can. So that's how the startups can actually grow within that portion. So that's my take on the individual side. That's more of a behavior. Second is on the government policies. Whether we like it or not, I think most of the time I think let's go with the slightly more sensitive topic, which is the funding and the currency. Malaysia currency is quite weak as of today.
Yeah.
When we pitch to investors, for example, if we had $1 billion ringgit transacted, but when you go to the States, it's like 200 million. So it's shortened by 4. That portion alone is already something that we definitely need to start looking at as well. At least on the government policies, I know some of the guys who are sitting out here work with the government. I don't mean to offend you, but one of the things that you guys really need to understand is that the funding ecosystem is always skewed towards the companies that are favored. We are very lucky, DROPEE. We're one of the companies that a lot of the media, a lot of the government actually love to work with us. And that's why we're quite blessed. A lot of times, whenever we do want something, we do get a lot of support. But as I mentor and talk to a lot of other entrepreneurs and startups out there, if they are new, they're nobody in the scene, nobody really wants to help them because it's not popular. It doesn't hit the government's KPI. And most of the time, this is something that a big reality check. You, especially if you work on the taxpayers' money, you do need to help everyone. Be as transparent and be as open as possible. Because it's really not fair. I know that if you were to help really big companies, big startups, like what Henry mentioned, if you give Malaysian preference, yeah, you do hit your KPI. But the truth is that a lot of the companies, if they don't have the opportunities, they cannot shine. And I think that's something that we're lacking of, and I do hope government will start looking into that. I do see that there's changes even with MYStartup and Cradle, and even Cyberview. But I think we do need a lot more support in that.
Okay, so a lot more support needed for funding, not just for the bigger ones, but also the younger companies to make sure that they have visibility and access to these fundings as well. If they don't have, especially if they don't have anyone to champion them and they're not the ones who are always seen. So on that point, Jason, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
I think they pretty much covered everything, but yeah, but for me, I believe that incubators and accelerators do help me personally as founders as part of the MYStartup program, and and one of the main thing is actually the mentorship program that is in the MYStartup, because you actually get to learn from people like what Aizat mentioned, that they have an Airbnb founder to actually guide them. So actually, I find that actually very useful as well from the MYStartup program. So yeah. So I guess that's my take, yeah. And of course, liquidity, right? But I guess pretty much they covered everything.
But anything you think they need to improve more?
I think, yeah, attracting foreign investments definitely, right?
Okay.
Because I realized that, there's, it's hard to actually tap into like a VC network as a Malaysian founder compared to other countries, right? So, but I do see some of the initiatives that the government is currently doing. So yeah, but I think, yeah, that is the main part for startup, because like for a founder, I think we are always battling against time and money, and liquidity is king, right? So funding is very important to ensure our runway, so we can really focus on building the product, right? Because when a startup is actually fundraising, a lot of the focus has to go to fundraising. It's not like just a side thing, right? You need to actually have a dedicated team doing that, right, to be able to successful and raise some serious amount of money, right? So yeah.
So again, it's funding again, but trying to bring those funders from external or overseas as well. So Donovan, being from overseas, any thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick one. So I think I'll transit the question to another direction, because I think hearing from the panelists, right, it's more when you think about ecosystem, the responses that I've just heard is more from like a support funding perspective. So carrying on from Jason mentioned, right, after assuming getting a round of funding, I will now talk about, when I think ecosystem, right, I'll talk about it more from a go-to-market point of view, which comes to me okay, maybe I'm biased because it's my role, but when I think ecosystem, right, the first thing I think about is partnerships. I mean, personally for me, when I read books, right, I'm a firm believer on the principle of multiplication. Instead of having one hand, why not have 10 hands, right? And for us at LARK, we are headquartered in Singapore. Like, how do we expand our product? How do we go to market, essentially, right? How do we localize our services? Channel partners, right? And I think I'm proud that in today's context, you would see that Exabytes is one of our partners in Malaysia, supporting us for the event, which in this case, as you can see, in real time, they provide localized services to potential clients, right? So just to maybe quick one, from a LARK's perspective, when we think about ecosystem that leads to partnerships, there are two parts. Number one is solution partners, right? So I'm talking about localized services that we can bring to the market. The second one, I think this is more in relation to any tech companies right here, is ISV partnerships, independent software vendor partnerships. So on this point, so LARK is an open platform, right, where developers can actually build custom applications on top of LARK. So we as a solution, we do ABC, but maybe what we don't do is DEF. So for instance, one of our offerings is OKR, but what we don't do are things like recruitment. We don't do performance management, right? So as we speak right now, I'm actually working with a Vietnam partner who has access to this, they are basically a HR technology provider in Vietnam. And so we are actually building the application on top of LARK. Now what's in it for both parties is then we can go to market together in terms of running co-marketing campaigns, events, and will really help to spread the audience, right, where both parties can then leverage the customer base, right? And you provide now a more unique value proposition. So yeah, I think on this point is talking about ecosystem, not just from a support funding perspective, but also thinking about it from a go-to-market point of view.
Okay, so from a go-to-market point of view, if you wanted more support from the policymakers, from the ecosystem itself, it's creating that partnerships and having matchmakers in a sense to help you really find that gaps and to recommend who you could partner with. That would be something that would be very helpful for many of you. Okay, that's good. Moving on to the next section about ethical considerations, because even when we have technology right now, we know that there's situations where there's a data breach or there's situations where people are concerned about the ethical side of using technology. So I wanted to go to Aizat first on this one.
Yeah, ethical. It's honestly a pretty tricky question. But what our company actually adopts, and I think it might be applicable to most entrepreneurs out here as well, is to always set up your first layer of foundation. So what I mean by that is that whenever you actually want to build a solution, try to also understand the perspective of customer again, and how you can also protect their information, their data, and so forth. if you don't have that policy since the beginning, high chances as your company scale up, you might realize that it's already been leaked. Some of your employees might have already taken the data and sell it to somebody. And it's very common, by the way, to see that some of the team members actually took some of your own company's data and sell it or share it over to other players. And so I think at least one that you can do is pretty much really set up the foundation and set up a really good SOP and policy to make sure that it's being protected and it's being covered. As easy as changing your admin password here and there, or breaking down the component of the data to multiple warehouses. So we're quite fortunate. One of what our CTO did is that every single data is really broken down to 3 encrypted warehouses. So one is in US, one is in Malaysia, the other one is in Europe. So even if, let's say, anyone were to hack our data, when they try to extract it out, it cannot be used because you need to get all 3 data warehouses. So that's one. However, I think to go into deeper a bit, one of the ways that you can also improve on is really to, sorry, what's the word? Be as transparent as possible. So when I say transparent means not just to your investors, but also to your team members, to your clients. So I think transparency is something that we Malaysians tend to be a bit more shy of, especially we don't really want to share everyone what's going on behind. Like, for example, if you run a business and maybe your investor decided not to invest in you, pull it out last minute. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs out there who try to keep it all to themselves. And what happened is that the amount of stress and pressure, it's really overwhelming. And whatever decision that they're going to do afterward is just going to be wrong. And just one thing that people need to know is that as long as you're being transparent, even to your team, you'll be surprised that they are also willing to go through and write it up together with you. And that not just on your employees, but pretty much your client and even external parties as well. And I think if you do have that kind of transparency, it creates some form of like unity amongst one another. And I think that will also somehow protect a lot of your data, a lot of the things internally as well.
But transparency itself takes a lot of courage, I think, from the company to be able to carry those type of conversations. How would you want them? How would you want to encourage people to take that road?
Very good question. I think it's just for you to really do it. If, let's say, you're not comfortable in sharing publicly, then find a peers, like among yourselves. Find another entrepreneur. Find another team members around your stage as well. Because you tend to be more comfortable when you're talking to somebody who is very relatable to you.
Okay.
I think that's a good start. But after that, start sharing with a lot more people. Even for us, DROPEE, my other co-founders as well, what we did is that we tend to just literally be transparent. When we had a really bad month, last month, we would just tell investors, this is what happened. This is the things that we did not anticipate, and this is how we're going to change that. But they also understood that even we try to change and pivot from then, we might not still get it right. But as long as you're transparent and let people, everyone knows beforehand, I think that will be quite easy. At least one stress from your end has already been lifted off.
So with the transparency, you're also asking help from your peers as well as others to see what else they can do for you, which also goes back to the previous conversation on how you need to create that ecosystem of helping each other as well.
Yeah, hope that answers your question.
Jason, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll share on ACXYN's perspective, like how are we actually addressing this issue. So for us, actually, we really value data privacy and also ownership. So the way we approach it is when we actually design our data architecture, so we really think about how we can move this data across securely, and we actually leverage on decentralization technologies. So we have private keys to certain data to access them. We need certain private keys to actually access them. So that is actually kind of how we are actually addressing that based on that question, yeah.
Okay, so you plan for it up front to make sure that it is taken care of and don't leave it to chance in any way.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we are a blockchain company, right? So yeah, decentralization is important to us, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to shift it a bit into looking at the social aspect of things on how is there an increasing need or trend for companies to also look at the social responsibility per se in addressing all of these key challenges like inequality of income, in climate change? How can technology play a better role in supporting these items? Jason?
Yeah, I think this is a tricky one in the sense that because I think that social responsibility is important, but as founders, I think it's even more important to build a sustainable business, right? So when we have a sustainable business, then we can actually think about social responsibility. So I think as founders, what we really need to do is really build a sustainable business so we can survive first, but with the thought of social responsibility. So like for us, right, like previously, if you look at like Ethereum, right, so Ethereum uses proof of work. So it's actually very energy consuming. So now when we started building ACXYN, so we thought of which chain should we deploy our platform on. And one of the reasons why we chose Tezos is because they are an environmental friendly chain, right? So this is some of the things that we think about when it comes to social responsibility. And maybe in terms of like income equality, so for us, we really don't look at this factor like gender, race, or whatever. We actually just focus on results. Our company really focuses on results. As long as you're capable of delivering the result and aligning with the company's goals, right, we hire you. So that's my take on that.
So you want to ingrain those principles into your company per se and not just leave it to something that you may or may not do later on.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm just going to segue because I'm into the social entrepreneurship realm. So I believe that we can do both social and entrepreneurship at the same time and still reach the goal that we're looking for, the change that we're looking for. Sorry for the segue. But Henry, bringing it back, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think it's true like what you say. Entrepreneurship can be in any form and it can be any way and it applies to all kind of industry. Basically, entrepreneurship is a situation where you're trying to improve certain things, And I think social entrepreneurship is really something doing really well. I think, there's a company called like Pizza Eat, for example. It's a really cool social entrepreneurship kind of organization. I think it's true. I think the key part is that, like what Jason said, is also true. If your company is not sustainable, it's also very tough to do corporate social responsibility. But I think really the key part about CSR, even like for our company, is that it's rare to create a culture or a balance in that perspective. Sometimes we might not be, at the time initially when we started, we always thought about CSR means going to an orphanage, going to an old folks home to paint out the house for them. I mean, we did that initially, but I think it's all about then the whole entire company's culture that needs to be there in terms of supporting CSR. It's not just about going into orphanage or old folks home. So what we adopt in a sense that our culture is very much like whether we input ESG and CSR together, but I think generally the whole idea in then we try to cultivate culture, like for example, environmental is one area that we need to be, governance is one area that we need to do, because while these are not direct impact to social, but I think what we do, if we look into principle of ESG perspective, right, will contribute indirectly to the betterment of the society. Obviously, there are also, like say, equality or pay gap and things like that, especially in US they talk about the female and male has a very, very big gap in terms of salary, and there must be a policy to do that. I would say whether fortunately or unfortunately, there is no gender policy in MACROKIOSK. We do not say that why should I provide a handicap to the female because females are just as good as male. That's our policy, right? Because we just look at results, we just look at what they can do and where they can excel. And I think that's where, because of this mindset, all of a sudden the equality becomes there by itself. Like in our management team, we have like equal amount of male and females. It's not done out of purpose, but rather that we done out of the point we do not have such policy. Our policy is just about merits. And I think that's where actually we can see females are just as good as male, if that is that's the part, right? So I think we do have specific policy for equality, but then as far as we are open, transparent, and level playing ground for everyone, this way it goes up to be equal. It will automatically equal by itself, yeah.
Okay, so culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's what you're trying to say in terms of trying to make sure that it's inculcated. But was there any situation where it was tough to change that culture of making sure inequality or making sure the social change you wanted to bring was difficult?
I mean, in terms of MACROKIOSK perspective, we are quite fortunate because it started out from ground zero, myself, my brothers. So we adopted this same strategy throughout, and I think it's a culture that we are then built to be. But however, as we expanded, currently now we are in 12 different countries around the region. I think there are cultures where, very unfortunate that male gets preference, to be honest with you. It's not something that we adopt, but I think it's a challenge that we start to then having our country managers being made female, for example. So we have 2 countries that's run by female now, country managers. Obviously, the problem is then, if it's a society that is emphasizing looking at male as a front, and that is really a challenge for us. But obviously, we suffer at the beginning. But I think as all the countries are more open-minded towards this environment, actually, it became an advantage having a different kind of leader in that country, I think. So I would say that if that's your culture or company, I think it doesn't need to change, but we need to fight. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes the advantages of persistency became an advantage by itself. Yeah.
So the alignment among your whole management team first and foremost, and then you were able to bring that forward even when you did expansions overseas. Aizat, any thoughts on this one?
No, not really, because both of them already pretty much covered the entire thing. I just want to address that, at least for startups, ESG is important, but it's more important for you to really make your business sustainable first. There's an idiom, I think, when you go to flight, when emergency actually come down, they actually ask you to take care of yourself first before you can help your kid. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much applicable on the ESG for startups, I think. At least focus on your businesses first before you start looking into all this ESG. I'm not saying that it's a vanity metric. It is important later on, but at the earliest stage of a company, I think you just focus more on your businesses first. ESG is part of it. I don't think any one of us are doing something illegal anyway or really disrupting the environment. So that's the core of it, I guess, that pretty much just focus on your business. ESG will eventually be there as well.
Okay, so make sure you survive first, then only you will be able to help other people.
That's right.
That's good feedback. So last question before we open it up to the floor. What is your advice? Let's tap into your wisdom of being in this space for so many years. What is your advice to younger founders on how to stay ahead of the curve, how to deal with these technology changes? What would you say? Donovan, do you want to share your words of wisdom?
The thing is, I don't know whether I got words of wisdom or not. Okay, just joking. I think you guys thinking about lunch already, so I'm looking at the time. Anyway, I think if there's one thing, right, I would say it's agility. That reminds me yesterday when I was taking the Grab from the airport to the hotel, then the Grab driver was like, 你有没有口罩? Which is, do you have a mask? I'm like, oh yeah. So it's just elaborating that the number of COVID cases is like rising again, right? So I think on this point is that the future, with the introduction of COVID, right, I think the future is very uncertain for everybody, for businesses, for individuals, and for everybody. So the essence of agility really helps a business to be nimble, to be agile, and to be the ability to be responsive to market and economic situations. So when I break agility down, I think there are 2 aspects, right? Number 1 is internal. So touch wood, but should we ever go into a lockdown again? Is the business resilient, which is something that we just spoke about earlier? Have we future-proof the business in terms of like keeping employees engaged, right? Because if employees work from home, I mean, as founders, how would you actually know that they are working? Are they still meeting business objectives, which is also something that we spoke about? So I think internal is one thing. How do you engage? How do you have digital technology to help employees to communicate and collaborate? I think that's one. So internal. I think the other part is then external, right? So again, touch wood, if we go into lockdown, does the business have channels to reach your customers? So this is more from a marketing and sales point of view. So, but yeah, in essence, I would say it's agility.
Okay, so you have to look from it from an internal perspective and external perspective to make sure that you're helping yourselves in the future. Aizat, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, so I've already addressed it earlier. I think it's more of really talk to your customers. Doesn't matter what stage your company is in. It's very, very critical. And just make sure that at least once you actually do that, at least once a year, you'll be able to actually drive and direct your company better. Yeah.
Okay. So make sure you make that time once a year to at least talk to your customers.
At least.
Okay, good advice. Jason?
Yeah, I think for me, knowing your purpose before you start a company is very important. And you know, when you start a company, it's actually going into a gunfight. So please bring your gun. So what does that mean? Is basically you need to be prepared, right? So there's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make, be it family time, friends time, you know, even your hobbies, you know. So as founder, it's not easy. You have to be prepared to work 16 hours a day, right? So, you know, Elon Musk works 20 hours a day, right? So of course we can't be Elon Musk, but you know, we try to be as close as possible, right? So I think being prepared is super important, right? And you know, it's actually very different from being an employee and being a founder. So I think that mindset is very important before we start. So are we ready to do it? I think we need to ask ourselves this question before we actually get into it. So yeah, that's my thought.
So be prepared for the grueling hours that it's gonna need. Okay, lastly?
Okay, talking about sacrifices, it's true. You know, I started my company when I was 19 years old. So my sacrifice is that I have not been clubbing enough. So I like probably lost the whole entire clubbing scene. You know, when the time when I finally find some time, I'm already too old to go clubbing anyway. But talking about, you know, all of us startup entrepreneurs or even entrepreneurs per se, I'm sure every one of us heard about fail fast and fail quick, fail fast. What's that word again? That means there are some wisdom to that portion of words, meaning that you fail fast means you take risks to, it try to like champion you to take risks, basically. Or what entrepreneur does as well, we do take risks. And there's a wisdom to that portion of it. But however, it's not the whole entire wisdom. Many people take the wisdom of failing safe or failing fast is to then, it tak jadi lah, means it doesn't happen, right? So we'll do another one again. Some people take the wisdom of that portion. But for me, I think that while you need to fail fast, that's one thing, means you take risks, but the other part of it is that you also must have a thought that you must not fail. When you do not want to fail, you actually push yourself to another layer, another level, that you can actually do even better results than you failing fast. Many entrepreneurs, especially even popular ones, will say, oh, fail quickly, fail fast, fail. Yeah, I understand that, please fail. But the key point is really then, you must also have the resiliency, the sustainability, the thoughts of saying, I do not want to fail. And that's the most of the time. When that happens, you actually push yourself harder and more important. So I would suggest my advice is really, please do not think fail fast is a good thing. Think about it as please do not fail. And that's where you can actually push yourself much further ahead.
Okay, so the aim is not to fail, but try not to fail. If you have to, then you pivot.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Thank you so much to the panel members.